Yo, what's going on? It's Brian for the Backspace Nomads. On today's game review, we're diving deep into the dungeons and jungles for a review of Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation. I've got this big nerd part of me that never really gets to get out much. It lives apart from the rest of my nerdism all on its own. I'm a massive D&D fan. I've read the books, I've watched the movies, I've listened to D&D adventures on podcasts, Critical Role, hello. The one thing that I don't do is actually play D&D very often. Outside of a few stints and some video games inside of the D&D universe, it's really just not existent for me. I just don't know enough of the right people to actually play a D&D campaign. When stumbling upon Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation on episode 35 of the podcast, I was very excited about it. Yes, it's not a D&D campaign, but this is a board game version of D&D. One where you take on a classic character type and use the dice to work your way through a game board and try and win. This has to be good, right? Well, by the end of this review, we're going to find out, and you'll have enough information on whether or not you should buy or skip Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation. If you enjoyed this review and you want to give it a thumbs up or share it, it's really appreciated. If you enjoy more of the content here on Backspace Nomads and you decide to subscribe to the channel, thank you. It means so much to us. This is Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation, and here's my review. Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation was released by BKOM Studios on October 11th, 2017. You can find the game on Steam, and if you want to buy it, it's going to run you about $15.99. Let's start with how BKOM Studio describes their game on Steam. Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation is a turn-based dungeon crawling game based on the Dungeons & Dragons Adventure System board game, and I hope that's the last time I have to say that because it is a mouthful. Continuing. On a deadly peninsula of Jolt, an adventuring party must fight their way through dangerous jungles, labyrinths, and dungeons to find and reverse the cause of the death curse. Choose to play one or more of the four adventurers to face many perilous challenges and deadly foes throughout the quest. End quote. That's a pretty good overhead of what's going on inside of the game, but let's dig just a little bit deeper. This game is based on Dungeons & Dragons Adventure System board games. I swear I said I wasn't going to do it again, but there it is. Alright, last time. This is a completely new thing to me. This board game, I've never seen it before. I had zero idea of what it was going into this. The board game allows you to play 4 characters at the same time. You move your group across large tile pieces to expand the game board. Each tile is unique in its layout of walls, traps, and monsters. And as you play through these boards, there are different quests with varying challenges that allow you to complete them. The other half of the game is a quest selection map that also incorporates an item crafting and upgrading system. Also, there's an ability menu to outfit your character's abilities. That's a lot to take on at once, and that's a very brief overview, but later in the review, we'll get more in depth with those systems. For now, let's just start with our first section. Story. One thing I really appreciate about Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation is just how rich it feels when dealing with the story inside of its game. On the surface, you really don't need to dig that deep into the game's story to enjoy yourself, but the deeper you dive into the writing of the backstory of other characters in the world, the more enjoyment it gives back to you. Every quest that you're given has a brief synopsis of why you're about to try and complete it, and it just feels really meaningful. You are presented with 4 characters in this game: a human ranger, an Arkoraka mage, a taxibaxi bard, and my favorite, a lizard-looking serial paladin who they actually named Dragonbait. It's pretty awesome. Each of these characters has a decent background fleshed out at the beginning of the game in their character menu, and what I most enjoy about playing them all is that looking through their abilities and their items and everything about them is just all designed to fit them. D&D is such a fantastic platform for character creation. Everything that you build about your character just lends itself to fitting a narrative, and it really shines in the characters that they give you to play inside of this game. My only takeaway from the characters in this game is that I wish I would have more of their own personal stories woven into the game, just a little bit more. They don't necessarily feel like they're connected to the world, but rather just game pieces set on a board. The ranger artist Simper, he feels just more like a thimble or a top hat than a ranger on a quest. The overall game story does feel compelling and like a D&D adventure. Slashing and spellcasting your way through enemies doesn't feel meaningless at all. The bosses you begin to run into, they feel informed naturally by the quest and the story. I just wish I had a little bit more influence over it. So with the story set, let's move on. Graphics. This game looks really good. It's a fantasy set within the D&D universe, and it just looks fantastic. If you played any of the D&D games that have been developed over the past 10-ish years, you will feel right at home inside of this. The setting as Chult is done remarkably well. The first part of the game is set in the jungles and it just works. It's set against this black background and the board game really fits naturally into it and pops. Making this game feel like a board game and also a video game had to have been a really tough challenge for the developer, but BKOM Studios put the work into it and it really pays off. My only complaint would be that as you play through the quest, you really only start on the same set piece, and then tiles build out from there, right? And it's just, you feel like you're playing the same level over and over. I know that the tiles and challenges change, but I would have liked a few more visual differences inside of these graphics when it came to each quest. Once you reach the part of the game that takes part below the jungles inside of the dungeon, it's a refreshing change of pace. But even with this, after time, these dungeons start to feel a little bit stale like the jungles did. I think my main problem might not just be with the graphics, but kind of how the gameplay flowed overall. If they would have woven these parts of the game in and out a little bit more, maybe it wouldn't have gotten as stale. So visually we know how the game feels, so let's see how it plays in our next category, gameplay. There's a lot to unpack in this game when it comes to gameplay, so hang with me during this section. The first half of the game world consists of selecting your character's loadouts and choosing which quest to send them to conquer. Character loadout is handled in a very streamlined and smart way. Each character has a selection of abilities that inhabit the standard D&D ability slots with respect to how often they can be used. Swapping out these abilities can drastically change how a character in a group is played. This system is just the right amount of depth without bogging down the players in a jungle of abilities. Very smart. Next, your equipment loadout pertains to the standard fantasy loot slots, weapon, armor, trinkets, and so forth. Each one of these slots can be upgraded by crafting a more enhanced version of the previous item. These upgraded items directly affect the worthiness of your abilities in a very straightforward way. The design of this is to really simplify a system for a board game setting, but in action, it really takes away from the notion that you're building a character. It's streamlined and intuitive, but it's also handicapped by the resource collection aspect. The game feels like it was designed to make you replay earlier quests to keep up with monster levels. At times it feels like it's more punishing than it should be, but it's definitely not game ending. Now we can start to dig into the actual gaming part of the gameplay. The game is played through a series of turn-based phases. Every character's turn is played through 3 phases, each phase presenting its own unique purposes and challenges. Without diving into the depth of each turn, the turn-based setup is a really enjoyable mechanic that once you start to understand it, you just fall in love with. A large tile system is implemented to develop the game board as you move along. Each tile is unique in its layout, monster occupation, and the traps or treasures that sit on top of it. Navigating these tiles and managing their discovery is a large part of the challenge of this game. It's very easy to understand at first, but as you play and you get deeper into your knowledge of this game, it just becomes extremely rewarding for how much you know. Gameplay as a whole in this game is really solid and enjoyable. There were some frustrations throughout the game. The randomness in crafting and unknown success rates when attacking were issues that became problematic, but the developer is very responsive to the community and has already patched these issues out of the game entirely. I mention it because their willingness to change what they have made this quickly is something that is really impressive to me. And before we leave gameplay, I just wanted to point out how conscious I was throughout the game of just how rewarding it became. The more time and thought that I put into this game, the more successful my turns and overall experience became. It's a really great accomplishment by BKOM Studios, and it shows how much they are improving on what they had built previously. Next up, sound. If you ask me, sound design in RPG lives in this really weird space inside of gaming. Everything that you hear has to achieve this unique experience for the player, while at the same time feeling like the player has heard this for decades. It's a tough challenge that I don't think I would enjoy as an employee, so my heart goes out to all the RPG sound designers inside of game development. You guys are the MVPs. When it comes to Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation, I really feel like they nailed this. From being in a deep, mysterious jungle to the depth of the Tombs of Annihilation, the soundtrack for this game just puts you right inside of it. The game board can at times get a little bit long while you're playing it, and you just feel like you're doing the same thing over and over, but then the soundtrack never gets stale. It's a very calming, driving melody that keeps you engaged but not overwhelmed with the moments that a composer is trying to force on top of you. It's very well done. Sound effects for this game are just as good as the soundtrack. Every weapon attack sounds satisfying and on point what you think you would sound like. Spellcasting in particular is a big highlight for me. I'm not a gamer that typically plays mages, so hearing spells was a real treat for me. Everything felt so bassy and from this astral plane that I couldn't get enough of it. The sound effects in this game were making me just want to put down my swords the next time I play Skyrim and just pick up the mage. Finally, replayability. Let's finish our review with looking at the replayability of this game. I have mixed feelings about what's going on in this department. The game is definitely designed to make you want to go back inside of it and play the game again. Every quest in the game has 2 features for replayability. There are 3 difficulty levels that each have an increased reward with them. And then every board game is randomized as you play it. No quest is the same as the last time you played it. On the surface, this seems like the kind of thing that would lend itself to an endless playthrough whenever you wanted. A light casual dive at the D&D world after work. Just something to do without committing too much time to it. But there is something about this game that just isn't clicking for me in the replayability department. I think the lack of connection with me comes from not feeling like I'm actually building a character to play inside of this world. Instead, I'm just given characters to kind of change or upgrade slightly, and for my money inside of an RPG, I really want to feel like the time I invest in my character is having a direct effect on the character I'm building and the world he's in. I want to feel like he's actually mine or just me. And with that, I'm able to go defeat a world that I couldn't even think of existing or let alone beating at the time I started level 1. For some, replayability might be here. Maybe it's a game that I'll come back to and it'll pull me when I'm a little bit away from it and I want to replay it more. But just going through it one time was enough for me. Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation. This game was a definite change of pace for me when it comes to RPG games. The board game that it builds while sprinkling in the RPG elements is a very good combination that BKOM Studios has very successfully brought to the PC. This game is not without fault. I really wish that there was more to tie me to the game emotionally. I feel more like a spectator than I would like to inside of an RPG game. Notwithstanding, the game is really well made. The graphics and sound just all work together to provide a really fun and rewarding experience for the time that he's put into it. So if you're still wondering if you should buy or skip this game, I think you should absolutely buy Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation. Thanks for checking out our review of Tales from Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation. If you enjoyed this review and want to watch some of the gameplay, there is a Let's Play series on this game. If you want to drop a like or share this video, it really means a lot to us. But I'll see you next Monday for episode 36 of the podcast.